My grandmother had barely been laid to rest when my uncle handed me a glass of water and quietly said, "You will need this for what's coming next." At the time, I had no idea what he meant. 2 days later, I found out my cousin Ethan stood in middle of my grandmother's living room and announced that in front of entire family that I no longer belonged there. "You were never really family," he said coldly. "Grandma only let you stay because she felt bad for you. Once the will is read, everyone will know the truth." His words echoed through the room while my aunt, my other cousins, and even a neighbor who had stopped by with food listened in silence. I stood frozen, unable to believe that what I was hearing. 6 years earlier, when my grandmother, Eleanor Brooks, was diagnosed with Parkinson's disease, the family had agreed that someone needed to stay with her full time. Since I was between jobs and had always been closer to her, everyone quickly decided I should be the one. What nobody admitted was that none of them wanted the responsibilities themselves. So I gave up everything. I left my apartment in Denver, walked away from plans for graduate school, ended a relationship that couldn't survive the distance, and moved into my grandmother's small house in Albuquerque, where she had spent most of her life. For 6 years, I cared for her every single day. I organized her medication, drove her to appointments, sat beside her during long nights in hospitals, and comforted her during moments when she struggled to remember simple things. I cooked her favorite peach sorbet whenever she was upset because the familiar smell always brought her peace. None of it felt like a burden because I genuinely loved her. During those 6 years, Ethan visited only a handful of times. His mother rarely came either, and my other cousins showed up even less. Not one of them offered really help. Not one contributed to medical expenses when bill piled up. The only exception was my uncle Robert, who called every week despite dealing with serious health problem of his own. I never blamed him. The others were different. That house had become my entire world. I had painted the wall, fixed broken fixtures, maintained the yard, and planted the lavender bushes. My grandmother lived near the front porch. Every room carried memories of the life we shared together. Yet now, Ethan, who barely spent any time there, was acting as if it already belonged to him. The family attorney, Colonel Bennett, had scheduled the reading of will for Friday. Ethan spoke about it with the confidence of someone who believed he already knew the outcomes. He wandered through the house with his hands in his pockets, looking around as if he were inspecting property he was about to inherit. Then he stopped, looked directly at me, and said, "You should probably start figuring out where you are going to live. Things are going to get pretty uncomfortable for you after Friday." When I asked Ethan what he meant, he gave me a smug smile, the kind people wear when they think victory is already granted. "It means Grandma understood a lot more than you think," he said before walking out. After he left, I sat alone in the kitchen, trying to separate facts from fear. I knew my grandmother loved me, but I also knew that during her final years she had become more vulnerable. Around that time, Ethan suddenly started calling more often, and my aunt Karen, who had barely visited for years, began showing up regularly. The change had never felt right. That evening, I called my Uncle Robert and told him everything. He listened quietly before saying he was coming to see me in person. The next morning, he arrived looking older and weaker than before, but his calm presence immediately eased my nerves. As we sat at the kitchen table drinking coffee, he revealed something that changed everything. 3 months before my grandmother passed away, she had called him during one of her clearer days. She sounded worried. According to him, she said Ethne had been asking strange questions about her will, the house, and the whether she planned to divide her estate differently. Then Uncle Robert shared something even more disturbing. My grandmother had told him that Ethne claimed her attorney. Carol Bent believed the will was unfair and that I was so influencing her decisions. He had warned her that if she didn't make changes, the family could end up in a long legal battle after her death. My grandmother believed him because she was frightened and not thinking clearly at that time. When Ethan told her was completely false. When Uncle Robert contacted Carol, she immediately denied after saying any of those things. Then came the biggest surprise. Carol explained that shortly before her death, my grandmother had recorded a formal statement. In the recording, she calmly introduced herself and said she wanted to clarify the truth in case anyone tried to create confusion after she was gone. Her voice was weaker than I remembered, but every word was clear. She spoke about the 6 years I had spent caring for her, about the sacrifices I had made, and about I had made never treated like how I had never treated her like a burden, even on her hardest days. Then her tone became more serious. She said she loved all of her grandchildren, but she knew exactly who had been there for her and who had only started showing interest when they learned her condition was getting worse. She went on to describe a visit from Ethan just 2 months before she signed an amendment to her will. During that visit, he convinced her that her attorney thought that will was unfair and that legal changes were inevitable unless changes were made. As the recording continued, my grandmother admitted she signed amendment because she was care confused, believing she was protected the family from conflict. Hearing those words sent a chill through me because it was becoming painful clear that someone had taken advantages of her at one of the most vulnerable moments of her life. At the end of recording, my grandmother looked directly into the camera and said she wanted it officially documented that her original wishes had always been the right ones and that she had been misled into changing them. Then her expression softened. Sweetheart, she said gently, speaking to me, the lavender bushes look beautiful. The moment I heard those words, I broke down. I stepped outside Carol Bent's office and stood alone in the cool November sunlight, trying to hold back tears because finally returning inside. By then, Kroll was already taking action. When Friday arrived, the atmosphere at the will reading felt completely different. Ethan walked in, looking confident, dressed as if he had already secured his victory. My cousin Chloe and Ryan sat together because but avoided eye contact with me, while Aunt Karen stayed close to Ethan, appearing unusual calm. Uncle Robert sat beside me. Once everyone was seated, Carol entered carrying a folder and immediately announced that new evidence had surfaced regarding the legality of the most recent amendment to the will. For the first time, Athens' confidence visually cracked. Kroll explained that the amendment signed a few months earlier had been obtained through false information. Specifically, Athene had falsely claimed that Kroll herself recommended changing the will, a deception that directly influenced my grandmother's decision. Because of that misrepresentation, the amendment could be legally invalidated. Athene quickly protested, accusing Kroll of twisting the facts, but she remained completely calm. She revealed that she possessed a recorded statement from my grandmother detailing the entire conservation conversation along with the phone records confirming exactly what it when it happened. Then she asked if he wished to continue challenging the matter. Suddenly he had nothing to say. The legal battle he had quietly planned for months collapsed before it even began. The evidence was simply too strong. My grandmother had anticipated exactly what might happen after her death and had carefully protected her true wishes. In the end, the original will was upheld. The house where I had spent 6 years for her caring was left to me, along with the larger portion of her estate as she had always intended. Chloe and Traian received the inheritances she had planned for them from the beginning. No one argued, no one challenged the decision. Looking around the room, I couldn't help wondering whether some family members had known about Ethane's scheme than they were ever admitted. But in that moment, I realized it no longer mattered. My grandmother was gone, and wasting the gifts she left behind on bitterness and family feuds would have been the exact opposite of what she wanted. Her final act had not been about money or property, it had been about protesting the truth, and in the end, the truth won. Ethan walked away from the almost nothing from the estate except a single item my grandmother had personally listed in her original will. My grandmother's old pocket watch, even that felt intensely as if she had carefully decided exactly what each person deserved. After everything was settled, Uncle Robert stayed with me for a week. Most evenings he cooked dinner together and sharing stories about my grandmother's younger years. Long before she became a grandmother, when she was a young woman chasing dreams and building a life without knowing where it would eventually lead. Listening to those stories felt like discovering a completely new side of her, and it was one of the greatest girl's gifts he could have given me. On his final morning, we sat together at the kitchen table drinking coffee when he brought up something I had almost forgotten about my education. He told me my grandmother had spoken to him 2 years earlier and sa- she said hoped I would return to college someday when the time felt right. She never wanted to me lose to my own future while caring for her. His words stayed with me long after he left. Looking around the kitchen at the walls I had painted, the sunlight coming through the windows, and the home we had shared for so many years, I realized he was right. A few months later, I enrolled in a university program to study environmental science, the field I had always dreamed of pursuing. I kept the house because it was not just something my grandmother left behind. It was also something I had helped build and preserve. Near the front door, I placed a small plaque that simple reads, Eleanor Brooks lived and was loved here. The lavender bushes I painted years ago have grown tall and strong. They survived harsh winters, intense summer heat, and everything in between, just like the memories attached to them. Sometimes I still think that about my grandmother's final recording and the reason she made it. She knew someone might try to rewrite her wishes after she was gone. So she made sure her own voice would tell the truth. She spent her life being thoughtful, careful, and clear about what mattered most. And in the end, she protested that the truth one last time. Whenever I remember Ethan confidently walking into that will reading, believing he had already won. I also remember Carol Bennett calmly opening that folder and revealing the evidence that changed everything. Then I think about my grandmother sitting in that chair recording her message while quiet determination, and every time I come to same conclusion. She understood exactly what was happening all along, and she made sure the truth would outlive her.